The sun dipped low over the sprawling Malik estate, casting golden light on manicured gardens and marble fountains. From the outside, the mansion was the epitome of luxury: tall glass windows, imported vines, draping balconies, and white peacocks strutting near the reflecting pool. It looked like the perfect home for a perfect couple. And for a time, Anya Malik believed it was. 7 months pregnant, Anya glowed with the warmth of impending motherhood. Her long chestnut hair was tied in a soft braid. Her hands instinctively, resting on the gentle curve of her belly, she walked barefoot through the garden each morning, talking to her baby in hushed tones, imagining lullabies and soft cradles. She had everything: wealth, comfort, and a husband who, on the surface, had given her the world. Ramiz Malik was the kind of man magazines wrote cover stories about: charismatic, handsome, sharply dressed in tailored suits, and always in control. When they married 3 years ago, he had swept Anya off her feet with grand gestures and poetic promises. She had fallen fast, believing she had found not just a partner, but a soulmate. But something had shifted, subtly at first, then sharply. Ramiz's eyes no longer lingered on her face during dinner. His phone calls became more frequent, his meetings longer. He was always closing deals, expanding empires, or hosting elite fundraisers. When Anya mentioned the baby kicking, he barely looked up. When she decorated the nursery, he only nodded absently. "Everything I do is for you," he would say with a quick kiss on her forehead. "For us," but the warmth had faded from his words. Anya told herself it was stress after all, carried the weight of an empire. She believed him when he said he was just tired. She excused his distance, made up for it with more affection, more patience, but the unease wouldn't go away. One evening, as she folded baby clothes in the nursery, she noticed something odd. Her phone's battery was draining faster than usual. When she mentioned it to her friend Sarah during a video call, Sarah's expression shifted. "Have you checked your location settings?" she asked cautiously. "Sometimes, ... Guys put tracking apps on their wives' phones." Anya laughed it off. Ramiz, no, he'd never invade my privacy like that. But later that night, curiosity tugged at her. She opened her settings. There it was. A hidden tracking app, installed months ago. Her heart dropped. The next morning, Ramiz brought her fresh strawberries, the kind she liked, without her ever mentioning she'd run out. When she asked how he knew, he smiled too smoothly. "You mentioned it yesterday." She hadn't. Her world tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly. He began encouraging her not to drive. "It's not safe in your condition," he insisted, taking her car keys and offering a driver instead. He canceled her painting classes, citing unreliable instructors. Her friends stopped visiting. She didn't know if it was their distance or his subtle discouragement. Either way, she was alone more often now. Still, to the outside world, Anya and Ramiz were #couple goals. They posed for charity galas, smiled for paparazzi, and even did a photo shoot for a lifestyle magazine titled The Power and the Grace. People adored them. Anya wore the illusion like a designer dress, tailored, glamorous, but too tight in places no one could see. Behind the walls of the estate, she whispered lullabies to her unborn child and painted landscapes she never finished. Her soul felt like a locked room. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't name it, not yet. She didn't know it then, but beneath the marble floors and manicured gardens, a far darker truth was waiting to shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Ramiz Malik had always been obsessed with power, but power, like fire, consumed more the longer it burned, and now, the flames were licking at his heels. Behind his glittering reputation as a business mogul, he was suffocating in silence. His latest luxury resort venture in Dubai had failed. Disastrously, millions were lost. His real estate empire was over-leveraged, and worst of all, he had borrowed heavily from an offshore syndicate known for ruthless tactics. Not banks, not institutions, but a faceless group that dealt in silence and blood. They wanted their money back. Soon, on paper, Ramiz was still a king, but behind closed doors, he was cracking. The only person who knew the full extent of his collapse was the woman lying beside him most nights. Not his wife, but his mistress, Kinza Shah. Kinza wasn't like Anya, where Anya was gentle and trusting. Kinza was sharp-edged, street-smart, and unapologetically cruel when it came to survival. She had started as Ramiz's assistant, then became his secret lover. And now she had wrapped herself around his empire like ivy on old stone. "You don't need her," she whispered one night as she poured him a glass of whiskey in his private penthouse, not the one he shared with Anya. "She doesn't know how to play this game. She never did." Ramiz rubbed his temples. "She's pregnant." "Exactly," Kinza said, with a smirk. "She's a liability. You're stuck. You'll never be free, not with her, not with a child tying you down while your enemies circle like vultures." He looked at her, brows furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" She pulled out a file from her handbag and slid it across the table. "Life insurance. Signed 6 months ago. You remember, don't you? You're the primary beneficiary." Ramiz's hands trembled as he flipped through the papers. He had signed it at Kinza's suggestion back when things were still stable. At the time, it was pitched as a precaution. Now, it was a solution. She's worth $5 million dead. Ramez Kinza whispered, her voice like silk soaked in poison. That's more than enough to pay off the syndicate. You save your empire, your life, and we walk away clean. He stared at her. You want me to kill her? No, she said smoothly. Of course not. But if something unfortunate were to happen, somewhere far away, somewhere no one could trace. He looked away, horrified and tempted all at once. She trusts you, Kinza added, leaning in. More than anyone, you take her away, say, it's a getaway for the baby. Somewhere quiet, somewhere remote, an accident, a misstep, maybe she falls, maybe she gets lost. These things happen. The words made his stomach churn, but so did the thought of what would happen if the syndicate came calling. They didn't make second offers. They erased debts and debtors. That night, Ramez didn't sleep. He watched the file glowing under the table lamp. He watched Kinza's reflection in the mirror. Her bare shoulder curved as she slept against satin sheets. And he thought about Anya sleeping in her wing of the mansion, carrying the child he had once sworn to protect. His soul whispered no, but his fiend, Kinza's poison, shouted louder. By morning, he had made his choice. He told Anya over breakfast that they needed time together, just the two of them. No phones, no staff, a private retreat in nature. He smiled, held her hand, even placed it on her belly. She smiled back, touched by his sudden warmth. She didn't know she was smiling at the man who had just signed her death sentence. The moment Ramez suggested a healing getaway, Anya felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in months. We need to reconnect, he said, his eyes unusually tender. Before the baby comes, just us. No phones, no noise, just peace. Anya blinked, uncertain. It felt sudden, unexpected. But part of her, maybe, the part still clinging to the fairy tale, desperately wanted to believe this was real. That the man she had married was trying. That her child would be born into a home stitched back together. So, she agreed. They drove several hours into the countryside, winding through forests and valleys until they reached a secluded stone estate nestled between rolling hills. The property was vast, ringed with ancient trees and flanked by a distant, rust-colored fence with faded military warning signs. This place used to border an old army training ground, Ramez said casually, unloading bags. Long abandoned. Now, nothing to worry about. But the signs danger, live munitions were still posted, weathered but legible. Anya's stomach tightened. Still, she said nothing. He was being kind, again gentle even. They shared dinner on the terrace, the sky awash in lavender and gold. He lit a fire, and even rubbed her swollen feet. She smiled, hesitant but grateful. Maybe things were turning around. Maybe this was the man she fell in love with. But Ramez's mind was elsewhere. He had studied the map Kinza gave him. The area marked red still considered unsafe. The military had never fully cleared the terrain. Locals whispered of old mines buried beneath the soil, sleeping in silence. The fence wasn't just for show, and that's where he would lead her. 2 mornings later, with the sun just rising and mist curling over the grass, Ramez set the stage. Let's take some pictures, he said, pulling out the camera. You look beautiful in this light. Anya hesitated, dressed in a flowing white maternity gown he had bought for her the night before. The grass was damp, her body heavy. But the way he smiled, the warmth in his eyes, it pulled her in. They walked down a slope near the edge of the woods where the fence began. The warning signs were barely visible behind overgrown vines. Just a little further, Ramez coaxed. Look at the sunrise. Stand there, by that tree. Anya walked forward smiling, one hand on her belly. Ramez positioned the camera, then stepped behind her, silent. Her back was to him. The wind caught her gown, fluttering it gently. She turned halfway, ready to ask if he was taking the picture. That's when he shoved her hard. She stumbled forward with a startled cry, arms flailing. Her foot caught on a root, and she went down hard face first into the muddy grass just beyond the fence line. Pain exploded in her body. Her elbows scraped raw, her lips split, her vision blurred. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she heard him, footsteps retreating. Ramez, she croaked, blood in her mouth. Ramez, no answer. She tried to lift herself, but a sharp pain in her side made her freeze. Her ears rang. Somewhere, to her right, a bird shrieked and flew into the air. Then silence. Complete. Terrifying silence. Anya blinked through the haze. She was inside the restricted area. The fence behind her now loomed like a gate. She had fallen through, into some forgotten world. The yellowed sign just feet away. Warning, live mines. Nigh entreed. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear her own ragged breath. Her baby, her baby. She placed a trembling hand on her belly. Still moving, still alive, but for how long? Above her, hidden by trees, Ramez stood watching, hidden, distant, expressionless, and then he turned away. No panic, no regret. He walked back to the estate, one slow step at a time, calculated and clean. Behind him, his wife lay in the wet grass, bruised and bleeding. A child inside her, and every step she took from here on out could end them both. Zion Khan had spent the last 2 years running away from noise of success, noise of grief, and the crushing silence that followed both. once celebrated as the genius behind an AI security empire. Zion had vanished from the spotlight after tragedy struck. Tabloids had called him the billionaire who disappeared. They didn't know the truth, that his world had ended the night his wife, Aaliyah, died in a car accident 7 months pregnant with their first child. He'd sold shares, handed over, controlled to his board, and vanished into the quiet parts of the world. Nature became his only companion. Through the lens of his vintage Leica camera, he found fragments of peace. That morning, as the mist draped the trees in ghostly softness, Zion stood on a cliff edge with his camera trained on a flock of migrating birds. The sunrise broke over the forest in a golden arc, the kind of light photographers waited months for. But, just as he was about to snap the perfect shot, movement on the far ridge caught his eye. He lowered the camera. Far across the field, just beyond an old military fence, something had fallen. Zion narrowed his eyes. A figure, human, female, draped in white. He grabbed his binoculars through the glass. He saw her, a woman, motionless, blood on her face, one hand clutching her abdomen, her gown soaked in mud, the unmistakable swell of late pregnancy beneath her. His heart stopped. She wasn't moving. Zion froze, a scream echoing silently in his skull. Not again. Not this. He had seen that look once before, Aaliyah's broken body under flashing ambulance lights, his hands trembling as he held her. Cold fingers. The sirens fading into a memory that never left. He clenched his fists now, trying to breathe. No. He whispered, not again. The fence was marked. Faded red signs warned of buried mines. It was a known restricted zone. Locals avoided it like plague. Even the animals stayed clear. But she was inside, still breathing, still alive, and no one else was coming. Zion's instincts kicked in. He dropped his camera and jogged down the slope, stopping only a few feet from the fence. He scanned the ground, searching for patterns in the grass, natural lines, spacing, soil, indentations, say anything that might indicate a safe path. Years of watching survival documentaries, reading military archives, and photographing in dangerous terrains had taught him how to study the earth. The mines would be decades old, most likely buried near paths, open soil, or where enemy troops would be expected. There were rules to their placement. He had to trust his instincts. Zion crouched low, pulled a long branch from a tree, and gently tapped the ground ahead. Step by step, he crossed the old boundary, his heart pounding louder than the wind. Every movement was calculated, every breath shallow. He was 20 feet in. Closer now. The woman stirred. A soft groan, her hand twitched, her eyes fluttered open. Hey, he called softly, crouching just out of reach. Don't move, you're hurt. Her lips moved. Barely audible. Help my baby. Zion felt his chest twist. He took one more step, another, and another. Finally, he knelt beside her, his knees sinking into wet earth. I've got you, he said, brushing a bloody strand of hair from her face. I'm going to get you out. Her eyes locked onto his, full of pain and disbelief. He left me, she whispered. Zayan. Didn't ask who, he already knew. Zion's fingers trembled as he reached for his satellite phone, fumbling to press the emergency beacon. A blinking red light appeared, but there was no reply. He stared at the tiny screen. Nitrogen monoxide signal. Not here, not this deep into the mountains. He cursed under his breath and glanced back at the unconscious woman. Her breathing was shallow, one arm was cradled tightly over her swollen stomach. Blood trickled from her hairline, and her lips had lost their color. A faint bruise had begun to form along her temple. She didn't have ours, maybe not even one. Zion crouched low again, taking a long breath to silence the noise in his head. He reached into his bag and retrieved a collapsible trekking pole and a weatherproof journal. Inside were rough sketches of terrain maps and details from a documentary he'd once watched about abandoned war zones and deactivated minefields. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had watched that series out of fascination. Now, it might be the only reason this woman and her baby survived. He began to test the ground in front of him with the pole, tapping it at different angles, watching for soft depressions, small tripwires, or unnatural patterns in the soil. Old minefields were rarely random. They followed logic rows, spacing, clusters around obvious paths, but time eroded logic. Grass grew, trees fell, trails vanished. He moved slowly, painfully slowly. Each step was a choice between life and death. Tick, tap, step. Behind him, the sky darkened. A distant rumble of thunder groaned through the clouds. The air turned heavier. A storm was coming. He looked up for a moment, then back at her. She was slipping away. He could see it, her body twitching, her lips murmuring nonsense. Fever, blood loss, maybe shock. You're not dying here, he whispered, more to himself than her. As he moved closer, he dropped small stones behind him, marking the steps he took. A path. If he had to carry her back, he needed to remember every single inch. No guesswork. No errors. 5 steps. Away. Tap. Tap. The stick hit something metal beneath the soil. He froze. Sweat pooled along his back. Slowly, carefully, he withdrew the pole and stepped left instead. Another test. Grass, earth, stone. Safe enough. He made it to her side. Hey, he said softly, kneeling beside her. Can you hear me? Anya stirred, her head lolling toward his voice. My baby, ... Please, don't let us die. You won't, he said firmly, brushing dirt from her cheek. I've got you. Gently, he slid his arms beneath her, one supporting her head, the other under her legs. She whimpered, but didn't resist. Her body was frighteningly cold. He wrapped his windbreaker around her shoulders, tucking her close against his chest. And then, the real test began, the way out. Step by step, retracing the marked stones, he clutched her tightly as the first drops of rain began to fall. The sky had gone fully gray now, thunder cracking like distant artillery. The wind picked up, sweeping across the field and rustling the trees with an ominous growl. He kept his eyes on the ground, ignoring the trembling in his knees. Every step mattered. One misstep could end both their lives and the life growing. Inside her, tick, tap, step. Her breath caught suddenly, a sharp gasp. She twisted slightly, groaning. Stay with me, he said, his voice trembling. You have to stay awake. She blinked at him, barely able to focus. Who, ... Are you Zion? He said, I'm going to get you out of here. She tried to speak again, but her body sagged against him. Still breathing but fading fast. He quickened his pace, scanning each stone, avoiding any unknown patches. A rogue gust of wind knocked the last marker from view. His heart jumped. He stopped, breathed, remembered. 2 steps left. Hard right, 3 more. He followed the memory in his mind like a lifeline. And then, he stepped out of the zone, back onto safe ground. He nearly collapsed, but forced himself to keep going. The storm was fully overhead now, rain soaking them both. He carried her uphill toward his truck, parked near the cabin. Every muscle screamed in protest. Inside the vehicle, he laid her down gently on the back seat, wrapping her in blankets. He grabbed a medical kit, cleaned her wound, and checked for fever. Still alive, so was the baby. Only then did Zion allow himself to breathe. Only then did he let the weight of what had just happened sink in. He had walked through death to save a stranger. And for the first time in 2 years, something inside him felt alive again. Anya awoke to the sharp scent of antiseptic and the muffled sound of rain tapping against a window pane. Her eyes fluttered open, squinting against the dim light filtering through a curtain. She was lying on a soft mattress cocooned in blankets, her limbs sore but intact. A dull ache pulsed behind her temple, and every breath felt heavy like she had surfaced from a nightmare, only to find herself trapped in another. She sat up abruptly. Pain shot through her side. Panic followed. Where was she? The room was unfamiliar wooden walls, books stacked on a shelf, a burning fireplace, and the faint hum of a generator somewhere outside. On the nightstand beside her, a thermos of tea and a clean towel. She swung her legs off the bed and looked down. Someone had cleaned her wounds, changed her clothes, wrapped her in care. But care could be a trap. Her breath quickened. She reached for the lamp, ready to defend herself if needed. When the door opened, slowly, and in walked a man she didn't recognize. Tall, late 30s, thick black hair and deep-set eyes, shadowed with something between exhaustion and empathy. Zayan froze as he saw her standing. You're awake, he said gently, hands raised in reassurance. That's good. Anya's heart raced. Who are you? Where am I? My name is Zion Khan, he said calmly. You were injured. In the field, I found you inside the minefield. Her knees weakened at the memory. Mud, blood, Ramiz's face. The shove. She gripped the wall. You were watching me. No, I was photographing birds near the ridge. I saw you fall. I couldn't just walk away. Are you working for him? She whispered, eyes narrowing. Did he send you? Zion's expression tightened. Who? She didn't answer. I brought you here, he said slowly. I cleaned your wounds, stabilized you. There's no signal out here. This cabin's off-grid. I used to come here when I needed to disappear. Disappear, she echoed, eyes clouded with mistrust. That's what he wanted me to do. Zion took a cautious step back, giving her space. I'm not here to hurt you. You don't have to tell me anything until you're ready. Just know you're safe, I promise. For a moment, only the sound of the fire crackling filled the space between them. Anya's shoulders trembled. She sank back onto the bed, covering her face with her hands. Then, in a broken voice, she whispered, he pushed me. Zion didn't move. She continued, tears falling freely now. My husband, ... Ramus. He said it was a trip to reconnect. I thought maybe he wanted to save our marriage, but it was a lie. He took me to that place, stood behind me and shoved me into a restricted zone, into a death trap. Zion's fists clenched by his side. Why? He asked quietly. There's a life insurance policy. He's in debt and he's with someone else. ... A woman named Kinza. I think they planned it together. She looked up at him, eyes pleading. No one's going to believe me. He's powerful. Connected, he'll say. I got lost. That I ran away. Zion knelt beside her. Then we'll prove otherwise. You and your baby, you're not alone in this. Not anymore. She let out a shaky breath, leaning against the wall. The weight of her trauma pressing against her chest like an iron fist. Outside. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside had just begun. Meanwhile, back in the city, news had already broken. Pregnant wife of business tycoon goes missing in remote mountains. Photos of Rameez holding up her picture filled the television screens. He stood outside their estate, wearing a solemn expression. Addressing reporters. My wife is missing, he said, voice trembling on cue. If anyone has information, please come forward. I just want her and our child home. Cameras flashed. Headlines swirled. Rameez Malik, the grieving husband, and no one knew he had tried to bury her beneath the silence. Zion had always believed in proof. Not assumptions, not stories evidence. That belief had built his tech empire. And now, it would be the foundation to bring Rameez Malik down. 3 days after Anya confided in him, Zion drove to a nearby town with a single goal in mind. Find someone who could investigate Rameez without leaving a trace. He made a secure call to an old friend, Ibrahim, a cybersecurity expert who once ran black ops for corporate espionage cases. They hadn't spoken in a year, but when Zion said, I need help, this one's personal, Ibrahim didn't ask questions. They met in a rented cottage on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. Zion briefed him on everything in Ya's story, the push, the minefield, the motive. Ibrahim, ever the skeptic, listened in silence, then cracked his knuckles and opened his laptop. I'll find the rot, he said simply. What followed over? The next 48 hours unraveled the mask Rameez had worn so carefully. First, Ibrahim broke into encrypted insurance databases through dummy corporations Zion once used for AI simulations. Within hours, he retrieved a scanned copy of a life insurance policy, one that listed Rameez Malik as the primary beneficiary of Anya's $5 million death payout. It had been signed and processed 6 months ago, ironically. The same week Anya had discovered she was pregnant. The terms were clear. Accidental death would result in full compensation, a perfect motive. Next, Ibrahim extracted metadata from Anya's phone, which Zion had recovered from her coat. Hidden within the system was a spyware tracker disguised as a photo editing app. It had been installed remotely, likely from Rameez's own login credentials. The app had tracked every location Anya had visited for the past year, including the remote estate near the military zone. Zion clenched his jaw. He was watching her every move. Then came the money. Ibrahim dug into bank servers across Dubai and Singapore, trailing wire transfers between Malik Enterprises and a personal account under the name Kinza. The transactions were frequent but intentionally broken down into small, untraceable amounts. Over the last 4 months, Kinza had received over $200,000 in offshore deposits from shell companies Rameez controlled. Zion stared at the screen. He paid her to help plan it, but the final nail came from an unexpected source. A local wildlife photography enthusiast had flown a drone over the estate grounds. Just days before the incident, testing thermal imagery for a new nature documentary, when Ibrahim cross-checked aerial footage from public upload sites, one video stood out. It showed 2 people, one visibly pregnant, walking near the restricted fence line. The timestamp matched the morning Anya was found, and just before the figure in white fell, the man beside her stepped forward and extended his arm. Then she went down. The footage was grainy, but enough for a forensics team to enhance it and identify Rameez. They had him. Back at the sick house, Anya sat wrapped in a shawl, sipping tea as Zion laid out the evidence in front of her. Screenshots, printed documents, even a still from the drone footage. Each page felt like a dagger. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. I loved him, she whispered, even when he was distant. I thought maybe it was me, that I wasn't enough. Zion didn't interrupt. But it was never about love, she said, voice hardening. It was about control. And when he couldn't control me, he tried to erase me. Zion nodded. We can bring this to court, quietly, safely, once you're ready. Anya looked down at her belly, gently resting both hands on it. Not yet, she said. I want to protect my daughter first. I want her to be born into safety, not fear. And she will be, Zion said softly. You have my word. Meanwhile, Rameez Malik sat in his penthouse office, sipping brandy and watching news coverage of search parties still combing the wilderness. His expression was calm, calculated. Public sympathy poured in. He played the victim to perfection. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was beginning to crack. The truth was no longer buried. It was coming for him. The storm had passed, and with it something inside Anya had shifted forever. Weeks went by. Zion moved her to a hidden wing of his countryside estate, remote, peaceful, and well-guarded. A trusted midwife visited regularly. Her wounds healed slowly, but the emotional scars began to mend under the warmth of Zion's unwavering presence. And then, one golden morning, Anya went into labor. The pain was sharp and overwhelming, but her heart was stronger than it had ever been. With each contraction, she breathed deeper, not just to deliver her child, but to let go of the fear that had ruled her life for so long. Zion held her hand through it all, never leaving her side. His touch was steady, calming. When the baby's cries pierced the air, his own eyes welled with tears. A girl. Tunny. Perfect. Alive. Anya named her Amal, meaning hope. It was the first word that had come to her mind when she saw her daughter's eyes clear and full of a future, untainted by pain. She wept openly as she held Amal to her chest, whispering soft prayers into her downy hair. You will never know fear, never be used, never be silenced. Zion stood back, watching mother and child. He hadn't realized his own tears were falling. Later that night, as the fire crackled in the living room, Zion brought her a warm drink. They sat in quiet companionship, Amal sleeping beside them in a bassinet. I never told you about Olivia, he said quietly. Anya turned to him, listening. She was my wife. She was 7 months pregnant when we were hit by a drunk driver. I lost them both in one night. I shut the world out after that. I thought, maybe I didn't deserve a second chance. Anya reached for his hand. You saved me. You risked everything for someone you didn't even know. I didn't save you, Zion said, voice soft. You saved yourself. I just walked beside you. Their eyes met. In that look, something passed between them, gentle, raw, and unspoken. Not a confession of love, but of understanding. Two broken souls who had found in each other a reason to keep going. 3 days later, with Amal safe and Anya strong, Zion contacted Ibrahim. It's time, he said. Every file, every photo, every piece of damning evidence had been triple-backed and handed off to a legal team trusted by Zion for years. The case was airtight. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. There were no loopholes left for Ramiz to crawl through. Zion made one final request. Let the arrest be public. That weekend, Ramiz stood under flashing lights and microphones, speaking at a charity press conference for missing persons awareness. He wore a black suit and a sorrowful expression, flanked by publicists and PR managers. Cameras zoomed in on the framed portrait of Anya placed near the podium. I still believe she's out there, he said to the crowd, voice cracking just enough to seem real. And I won't stop looking until she's home. A few people dabbed their eyes, and then dashed sirens. 2 unmarked police vehicles pulled up behind the crowd. Officers emerged, cutting through the cameras, walking straight toward the stage. Ramiz Malik, the lead officer, announced, you are under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The crowd gasped. Shutters clicked. Reporters shouted over each other. Ramiz froze, disbelief washing over his face as the cuffs clicked shut. What the hell is this? He growled. I'm the victim. My wife is missing. No, the officer said, holding up a warrant. She's very much alive. A single flash from a camera captured the perfect image. Ramiz, handcuffed, eyes wide, cornered at last. Back at the estate, Anya held Amal against her chest as she watched the live coverage. She didn't flinch. Zayan sat beside her, quiet but present. Justice doesn't undo the past, she whispered, but it gives us room to heal. He nodded, and to begin again. The courtroom buzzed with restless murmurs, reporters scribbling, cameras rolling outside. The case had captured national attention. The businessman, the mistress, and the million-dollar betrayal. All eyes turned as the side door opened. Anya entered, shoulders squared, head high, wrapped in a soft cream shawl. In her arms, she held Amal, nestled against her chest. The hush that fell was immediate. Stunned, alive, radiant, unshaken, easy. Seated at the defendant's table in a dark, gray suit, turned at the movement, expecting perhaps an attorney or a witness. When he saw her, the color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He had buried her. In his mind, at least. Yet here she was, living proof of his crime, with the very child he had plotted to kill. Beside him, Kinza Shah panicked. She whispered urgently to her lawyer, then rose from her seat in an impulsive attempt to leave the courtroom. 2 bailiffs stepped in front of her. You're not going anywhere, Ms. Shah, one of them said calmly, clicking handcuffs over her wrists. She shrieked, struggling, but there was no escape. The cameras outside would soon have a new headline. The prosecution began. Exhibit after exhibit was laid out. The life insurance policy, signed by Ramiz, bank transfer records to Kinza's offshore accounts, GPS data and spyware logs, showing months of tracking Anya's every move, and finally, enhanced drone footage showing the exact moment he shoved her into the minefield. The room was silent but electrified. The truth was no longer whispered, it was on record. Anya took the stand, composed and clear. She spoke of the betrayal, the isolation, the shove, and the pain, not just physical, but emotional. She ended with a single sentence that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. He didn't just try to kill me, he tried to kill my child, and my future. When the judge returned with the verdict, it was swift and scathing. Ramiz Malik and Kinza Shah. The judge declared, you were both guilty of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and criminal conspiracy. You used love as a weapon and greed as your compass. This court condemns your actions as heinous and irredeemable. Ramiz didn't speak. He merely lowered his head as the guards led him away. Kinza sobbed, mascara streaking her face, screaming about how she'd been used and trapped. No one listened. As the gavel struck wood, the courtroom erupted in applause, not chaos, not fury, but righteous relief. Journalists captured the moment. Anya, rising from the witness stand, cradling them all, walking out into the sunlight. Outside, a crowd had gathered. They didn't cheer loudly, they simply stepped aside, creating a quiet path as Anya walked through, her baby held close. Zion, waiting beside the car. She had walked into that courtroom with the truth, and left with her future. The grass had begun to grow again, once cordoned off by rusting barbed wire and yellow danger signs. The old military zone was finally being reclaimed, it by soldiers or machines, but by something gentler, purpose. The air was warm as Anya stepped out of the car, her sandals sinking softly into the earth. In her arms, little Amal slept soundly, a tiny pink hat shielding her eyes from the sun. Wildflowers had begun blooming along the edges of the former Minefield, violets, marigolds, and small patches of lavender planted by volunteers. A new sign stood where the old warnings had once been: Field of Survival, a memorial for women who were left behind and chose to rise. Anya ran her fingers along the carved stone. There was peace in her now, unfamiliar but welcome silence inside. Her soul. She had not come here to relive the pain. She had come to own it. This was the ground where her life had nearly ended, but also where her new story had begun. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Zion approached, hands tucked in his pockets, smiling softly. He looked more at ease, now less haunted. Since the trial, he had emerged from the shadows of grief and purposefully poured his energy into something meaningful. They've cleared the entire area, he said, standing beside her. No more mines, just soil, flowers, and a lot of history. Anya looked up at him. It's beautiful. I thought you should see what came from it. What grew here? She nodded, emotion catching in her throat. Then he pointed to a nearby hillside, where a group of workers were finishing the paint on a white and blue building. A woman walked out with a little boy in hand, her face glowing with cautious hope. That's the Amal Women's Shelter, Zion said. Built on land next to the field, it opens next week. Anya turned to him slowly. You named it after her. He smiled. After both of you. Hope comes in many forms. For a while, they stood in silence, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon, bathing the field in soft gold. A soft breeze passed through, stirring the flowers. Anya handed Amal to Zaya, who took her in his arms without hesitation. The little girl stirred, then settled again, resting her tiny head against his chest. She's safe now, Anya whispered. We're safe. Zion looked at her. You were never weak, Anya. You walked out of a death trap with your soul intact. She smiled, and you walked into it, not knowing me, not knowing if we'd survive. I just knew I couldn't walk away. They began walking along the stone path that circled the memorial garden, hand in hand, no fear in their steps, no shadows behind them, just light ahead. As they reached the edge of the hill, Anya paused, turning to look back one last time. The place where betrayal had bloomed was now a place where healing had taken root. And then her voice echoed softly in inner monologue, a final truth. He left me in a minefield to die, but I found a man who walked into it just to save my life. I wasn't broken, I was being reborn. As the screen fades to white, a single wildflower sways in the breeze, untouched, alive.